Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Holistic Health Radio. I'm your host, Sarah Liz King. I'm an exercise physiologist and health coach here to help you find balance with food, fitness, and your body. Today on the podcast, I'm going to be talking about breakfast mistakes that you might be making that could be contributing to you losing your period or your period still being MIA in HA recovery. Now, when I first start working with clients, breakfast is probably the number one thing that I start making changes with them on because it can have such a huge impact on your recovery. And I also find it's the time of day where people are probably making the most mistakes. Which is why I wanted to highlight a few today. So, we're going to get into the biggest mistakes I see people make and obviously how you can go about fixing them so that you can make sure that you are well nourished for your periods to return. And if you need any more assistance and help, you can always click on the link in the show notes that takes you to Healing HA, which is our group coaching program for HA recovery. The enrollment is constantly open this year, so we're taking on new enrollments at any moment in time. You can read through all of the different enrollment options on the page. And of course, if you have any questions, you can always send me a DM. But let's get into those mistakes. So, mistake number one when it comes to breakfast mistakes that might be causing your period to be completely MIA or might be delaying its return is delaying breakfast for too long. So instead of having it when you wake up straight first thing in the morning, you're waiting a fair few hours before you have anything to eat. You might even be intermittent fasting. So you might be waiting until like lunchtime to have your first meal. Now, this does a couple of things. If we're talking about kind of like a hormonal profile and how this is going to impact you, if you're delaying eating for a really, really long period of time, it can have a really big impact on the stress hormone cortisol. So, cortisol naturally helps us get up in the morning. That's when it is highest. It basically is our wakefulness hormone, and it also floats around when the body is stressed. Basically, helps our body get energy out from where it's stored so that it can be used in different parts of our body. So, it helps kind of get those glucose and glycogen stores out of our body for our body to use. Now, the problem with cortisol, if it stays chronically elevated for a really long period of time, is that it also kind of competes for sex hormones being produced. Now, in HA recovery, that's pretty important because we want more sex hormones to be produced. So every time you're delaying breakfast in the morning, it is having an impact on that hormonal profile. The second is if you're constantly delaying your breakfast, it's actually going to be harder for you to get enough energy in during the day, right? If you're waiting kind of like 2, 3, 4 hours to eat, then the window of time which you have available to fit in the necessary energy to get that energy surplus is reduced. And you're probably just not going to have the time or the stomach capacity to get all of that in such a short window of time. So, delaying breakfast is such a common mistake that I see people make, and definitely one of the biggest contributors to why it takes some people so long to recover their periods. The second mistake that you might be making is not eating any breakfast before you exercise. Now, I think it's just so common that, if you've got a really, really busy schedule and the gym in the morning is the only time that you can go, that you're like, well, I'll just roll out of bed, put on my gym clothes and go straight to, that HIIT workout class or do my strength training or even do Pilates or whatever it might be, go for a run and you don't feel hungry, so you think, well, it's probably no problem, I can just eat something when I get back. Now again, if you don't provide your body with some energy beforehand, that exercise that you're going to do is going to be perceived as even more stressful on your body. So exercise in and of itself isn't like a terrible thing to do, but when your body's already underfueled, the impact of exercise, even low intensity exercise without any fuel in the tank, is kind of exponentially worse. So not eating breakfast before you go and do a workout, even a walk, I would say, is a really, really big mistake and something I definitely see people do, and it can be really hard to change your schedule around and figure out other times of the day that you can move your body. But remember, this is short term. You'll be able to kind of get back to those morning workouts well fueled when you've recovered your period. But that is a huge mistake I see so many people make. The next one is probably the biggest one that irks me, is thinking that if you have a coffee, it is a meal. Coffee is not a meal, even if you have milk in your coffee. The thing with drinking coffee first thing in the morning, coffee in itself is not going to be the cause of your periods being missing or them not coming back. You can safely drink coffee during recovery, but it does suppress your appetite a little bit and significantly for some people. And it's giving you a boost of energy, right? It basically dampens down the signals in our brain that make us feel tired. So you're probably drinking your coffee, going, I have a little bit of energy. I'm not really feeling that hungry. So I'm like good to go for the rest of the day. But just because you have that kind of like little hit of energy doesn't actually mean that you've given your body the necessary nutrients that it needs and sustainable energy that it requires for you to repay that energy debt that has been created when you have hypothalamic amenorrhea. So coffee is not a meal. It's not even a snack. When you have that drink, have it with something, because that is how you're going to give your body everything that it needs. And I highly recommend having a milky coffee, whatever milk you like. I'm not going to be particular. Obviously, cow's milk has a great source of protein and calcium, so does soy milk. But whatever personal preference you have a milky coffee, but have it with your breakfast so that you're actually giving your body the energy that it needs to recover your period. All right, moving straight along to the next biggest mistake. This is probably the one I see the most often with people who feel like they have kind of maybe some more orthorexic tendencies. So very, very fixated on being as healthy as possible. And that is overdoing your fiber intake. So this can sometimes look like, oh, I'm going to have an omelet, but I'm going to put as many vegetables into that omelet as I can. And like they'll quote unquote count as carbs, even though they're not good complex carbohydrates. And then you're missing out on key nutrients, but you're filling up on volume, you're filling up on protein. So you're kind of dampening down your hunger signals. You may not be fully satisfied, but you're definitely dampening down your hunger signals. So you feel like, oh, I'm fine. I'm okay to move on for the rest of the day. Like I've ticked the breakfast box. I'm doing a good thing. What I will say is you're doing a good thing by having something for breakfast, but it's not kind of the real balanced breakfast that you're going to need in order for your periods to return in a short window of time. The other thing I see with the fiber intake side of things is like putting vegetables in everything. Like even if you're having a smoothie, you're like, oh, just chuck in like, a whole thing of spinach, or, you put so many different like fibrous powders and things in there that you may not actually require. Or if you're like, well, I'm going to have fruit, you do, but you only really allow yourself to have kind of the lower calorie, higher volume fruit. So you're like, I'm only gonna have like strawberries, blueberries, raspberries, or like types of melon, because they are kind of high in water content, but not necessarily high in the energy that your body requires, again, to get out of that energy debt for HA recovery. So while fiber is not necessarily a bad thing, some people do have a lot of digestive concerns because they are simply overdoing the fiber. And if that is starting meal one from breakfast, you can kind of assume that knock-on effect is just going to increase throughout the day with all of the other veggies and fruits and salads and things that you might be eating. So when it comes to breakfast time, have some fiber, but definitely don't overwhelm your body with too much, because really we want to be focusing on the energy density of these meals for HA recovery. Now, there are two other mistakes that I really, really commonly see. The first one is not serving yourself enough, right? So what does that even mean? Well, what I mentioned before with those like lower calorie, high volume meals, it might be that you're having like a very large volume of food, but there's not that much energy in it. Or conversely, you might be having all of the right things like your complex carbs, a source of protein, some healthy fats, some color from some kind of fruits or vegetables. However, you might not be having enough of it. You might be thinking about food 30 minutes after you've finished eating, or you might be hungry 1 hour later, or you might notice that it's hard to concentrate or be productive, even though you've only eaten maybe not that far, like not that long ago. Those are all indicators that you're probably not getting enough in at breakfast. And I think portion sizes and how much your body needs can often be really distorted by the fact that the diet and the fitness industry makes us believe that eating as little as possible is the best thing ever and is what we need to stick to. But actually, our body needs a lot of energy to function, to recover our periods, and to sustain an active lifestyle even after you have recovered your periods. I I for one was really surprised by how much food my body actually required to, number one, get to having a natural cycle. But number two, when I started adding in exercise again to sustain that cycle, I was like, oh no, I actually have to eat quite a bit. And undoing a lot of those belief systems that you might have learned through years of dieting or years of things you've heard in the fitness industry or the diet industry, it takes time, and you might feel like you're doing the wrong thing by eating, enough food, but it's never the wrong thing to eat enough for your body to fully function. And that is what we're trying to do with HA recovery and beyond. The last and final mistake that so many people make, and this is probably one that you're all struggling with, not just at breakfast, but at other times during the day as well, is avoiding certain foods. Think of those like food rules and those food fears that might make you feel hesitant to add enough healthy fats to your meals, or have actually the amount of carbs that your body is going to require to help you recover your period. Or it might be that you allow yourself to have only the healthiest types of grains and cereals, but you won't ever let yourself have something like fun and enjoyable for breakfast. You might be putting protein on a pedestal and avoiding other things, which might be, like I mentioned before, making you feel, not as hungry, but you're definitely not satisfied. You're definitely not getting that balance of all of the different foods and macronutrients, and also like soul fulfilling foods that are part of, number one, a really healthy relationship with food, but number two, give your body actually what it requires to function, to feel your best, and to get natural cycles going again. So, if you have been listening to this episode or watching it and you're like, oh, I tick a lot of those boxes, maybe I'm making some of those mistakes, maybe you're just making one of those mistakes, and you're actually wanting to know, okay, Sarah, well, actually, what do I do to make a fully balanced, healthy breakfast that's energy dense enough, that's going to help me recover my periods, stay active as a female, beyond HA recovery, to have really healthy, regular cycles? I highly encourage you to join our intake of Healing HA. In there, I go through step by step how to build all of your different meals and snacks so that they're satisfying, so that it helps you break all of your food rules and food fears, and you're ticking the boxes in terms of getting enough energy into your body so that you can feel your best, you can feel the workouts that you want to be doing, and you can unlearn all of the diet culture nonsense that might have been floating around in your head for years. So you can click on the Healing HA link in the show notes or in the YouTube description. It'll take you there and give you all the info that you need to know. But thanks again for listening to this episode. If you really enjoyed the podcast and you're listening on Apple, iTunes, or Spotify, leave a 5-star rating and review. It really helps support the podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, give it a thumbs up, and leave any questions or comments you have below, and I'll be sure to answer those over the next coming days. But keep looking after yourself, and I will be back next week with a fresh new episode you can wrap your ears around.